Hey, my name is Josh Tice. I'm pastor here in Las Vegas, Nevada at Southern Hills Church, and I'm so glad that you chose this session for Idea Night. Look, today we want to talk specifically about creating an unstoppable team. That's right. We believe that with your help and your leadership, your deacons, elders, and ministry leaders can create an unstoppable team to accomplish the work of the gospel of Jesus Christ in your local church community. Now, here's the proposition for today. That dying churches rely upon the giftedness and calling of one individual person. It's the pastor. Maybe it's a single elder. Maybe it's one of the head deacons. Whatever it might be, the dying church is relying upon the giftedness and the calling of one specific individual person. Thriving churches intentionally develop a unified and diverse team of leaders who will take the church into the next level, into the future. Now, I'm not talking about your ecclesiology. Your ecclesiology may be different than my ecclesiology. How you set up your leadership might be a little different than how I set up our leadership here at the church. That's not the point of this discussion. The discussion that I want us to have on this presentation video and then among your roundtable is this. How can you thrive as a church through a multitude of unified and diverse leaders within your congregation? How can you make sure your deacons, your elders, or your ministry leaders, your pastors, all together on the same page? That's what we want to talk about today. And there are 3 steps that I want to share with you, all by way of sharing ideas so that you can discuss them further right there at your idea night. Number 1, I would say that as a leader in the local congregation, you need to be recruiting constantly. Constantly recruiting. You say, what does that mean? It means you need to be looking out there for potential leaders. To not just see yourself as the leader of the local church or as one of the leaders of the local church, but asking yourself continually, okay, who is it in this community has God brought in so that we can send them forward in our local context and maybe outside of our local context at one point? Are you recruiting? Are you thinking through who these people are that are walking into your church? As you see young men and young women, elder men, elder women coming into your congregation, are you asking yourself this question? Are they here to help me lead this congregation? See, to do this, there are several steps I use in our own personal life. Number 1 is to spend time in prayer. Jesus told the disciples to pray, therefore, the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth laborers into his harvest field. And I think for years as a church planter in Las Vegas, I began thinking, okay, God, I pray, and I prayed every day, oh God, please send laborers to Southern Hills, send laborers to us. Please develop great leadership, men and women outside of our church, and God, send us the greatest of these leaders. And God did. In these early days, God sent us a lot of great leaders. But then I began to think, what if we didn't just pray that God would send us laborers? What if we began to pray that God would send laborers from us? Instead of sitting around waiting for the greatest deacons, elders, and ministry leaders to come visit our church, what if we intentionally discipled the people that God gave us and then created ministry leaders that could go in our church and through our church to others? So, man, I began praying, God, you've got to send laborers here, but man, you've got to send laborers from us. Praying intentionally, God, who are the young men and women in our congregation that I could disciple and train to be the next pastors and deacons and ministry leaders and elders in our local congregation? Praying with intentionality, look for potential and involvement. That's what Paul told Timothy when Timothy was trying to build a leadership community in his local congregation. Paul said this, he said, and the things that you have heard of me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Looking for potential, looking for involvement. Who is it in your local congregation right now that is already deeply involved and has great potential to go to the next level? Have you taken intentional time in your weekly schedule to spend time in prayer and to say, God, who is it right now that's doing all the work of the ministry, yet they've not been trained properly? So what you do is you begin with prayer, you begin looking for potential involvement, and then you start building that relationship. This is all under point number 1 of recruiting constantly. Build the relationship. You notice this in the Gospel of Mark. When Jesus calls his disciples in Mark chapter 3, it says that he first called them to be with him, and then he sent them to preach the gospel. Jesus did not call the disciples at first just to go and preach the gospel. He called them first to be with him. And the more they were with him, they prepared to preach the kingdom of God. Okay, so if you're going to intentionally recruit, if you're going to be recruiting constantly, you've got to be in prayer, you've got to be looking, and you've got to be calling these people to spend time with you. Which leads us to our last thought in this first point, and that is make the ask. After you've prayed, after you've identified who they are, after you've been building that relationship, you got to make the ask. You just got to go up to them and talk to them. Over a cup of coffee, maybe over lunch, maybe over breakfast at IHOP, to look them deeply in the eye and say this, look, I'd like to spend some time discussing how you can help me lead this church into the next generation. I've had that conversation over and over and over with men in their 60s and men in their 20s, with young men and young women, with couples, and I've looked at them and I've said, I believe that God has you in our church, not just to attend, but because I need help leading this church. Now, you might have a different method, and I'm totally great with that method, but my question to you is, what is your method? When do you make the ask? When do you talk to people that you are beginning to see God do a work in, to look at them and say, I need your help in leading this congregation into the next level? So first and foremost, we say recruiting constantly. You as a leader in the church should be recruiting constantly. Number two, you should be mentoring intentionally. That is intentionally changing your schedule to invest as much time, energy, love, and gospel teaching into these new recruits. For us at Southern Hills in Las Vegas, I do a 1 full year leadership development. 1 full year where we go through a book together. 1 full year where I spend a lot of time eyeball to eyeball with them in small groups of 2 and 3 and 4 guys, so I can hear what their passion is and how I can bring them forward into the future. This mentoring intentionally, really not only me investing in them, but my second step is to really have them apprentice underneath a great elder, deacon, or ministry leader. What I want to do is, yes, I want to personally pour into them the philosophy of our church, the gospel of Jesus Christ, discipleship and leadership principles, theology and doctrine, but then I want to make sure this is the type of person who's very much like such and such a deacon. This is the type of person who's very much like this person who leads the women's ministry. This type of person very much is like the elder in our church who does technology. And with those things, I want to take that person, mentor them as far as I can, and then apprentice them underneath someone who could be like them, who they could be like in the future. It leads us to this concept of mentoring intentionally. It's not just me that's spending a full year with them. It's apprenticing these new recruits under good deacons and elders. And then lastly, becoming a leader of leaders needs to be the mindset that you shift to. What do I mean by that? Too many pastors, and I did for years, think of themselves as a leader of followers. This is why our churches cap at a certain level. This is why we can only lead so many people to Jesus Christ. Instead of viewing yourself as a leader of followers, you need to begin viewing yourself as a leader of leaders. Developing leaders among you so that you can then in turn watch them lead their own groups of people. This is the multiplication process that Jesus taught his disciples and what we ought to be reproducing even in our own era. Yes, I've talked already about how to create this unstoppable team of deacons, elders, ministry leaders, and pastors. How do we do this? First of all, you should be recruiting constantly. In your mind, praying and looking and building those relationships, making the ask. You should be mentoring intentionally. Whatever your process is to mentor them into that position, it falls on you. Don't wait for somebody else to mentor and then bring them into your church. No. You mentor them right where you're at. And then number 3 today, reviewing annually. So what do you mean by reviewing annually? When it comes to our deacons, we have instituted an annual review, best way to say it. One of the greatest frustrations of a deacon, an elder, a ministry leader, is lacking clear expectations from their pastor or ministry leader. They're frustrated because they don't exactly know what their pastor wants them to do. They don't really know exactly what their church expects from them. An annual review for your deacons, elders, or ministry leaders can help them tremendously create unity within the team. We ask 6 questions of our deacons in our annual review. And in our annual review, we send this to them ahead of time, and then they fill out a report, and then we get together one-on-one with those deacons. I do it with each and every one of the couples that serve in our deacons ministry, and I ask them, how did you fill out this report in these 6 questions? Here are those questions that we ask. Number 1, how are you serving the people of Southern Hills? Because they're serving. Our deacons are serving in multiple ways that I'm not fully aware of, and I want to be aware of it. Every year I want to look them in the eye and say, you tell me, how are you serving as a deacon, being a servant? And biblically speaking, this is what a deacon is. As a servant in the church, how are you serving the people? Tell me. I didn't know that you did that for our church. I didn't know you were doing that counseling. I didn't know you were editing those videos. I didn't know you were serving in that children's program. That's awesome. How are you serving the people of Southern Hills? The second question I ask is, how are you serving the pastors of Southern Hills? God has called us, and we see this in the book of Acts, chapter 6, God has called the pastors to spend time in prayer and in study of the word and in caring for the flock. And in doing so, there are a lot of responsibilities that fall to the servants of the church, the deacons. And I want to know, how are you serving us? I didn't know that you were taking time to care for the birthdays of all of the pastors. I didn't know that you were taking time to care for the ministry needs of this pastor or this ministry leader. It's awesome. And we want to find that out. The third question we ask in our annual review is, how are you promoting unity in the local church? You know, it's very sad to see that sometimes disunity happens in a local church, not because of those who are coming and visiting, or even from the church members, but sometimes disunity happens because of the pastors, deacons, elders, and ministry leaders. So we want to question that on an annual basis, eyeball to eyeball with these deacons. How are you promoting unity in our local church? Number 4 question, who are you personally discipling and spiritually mentoring right now? I want to know what's going on in your life that you're bringing couples through. I think of Drew and Christina, who are some amazing deacons in our church, and they just went through mentoring and spending time with Wyatt and Deanna, these newer Christians that are coming into our church about marriage and about what marriage is like. And it's been a beautiful relationship to see that develop. But I don't know of all those things, so annually I sit down. Who are you discipling? Who are you mentoring right now? Gone are the days of local churches where deacons are more like business associates who are speaking into the business world of the church. Gone are those days. The question is now, who are you actually leading to Christ? Who are you teaching? Who are you mentoring? Who are you discipling? And then number 5 question that we ask is, what are 2 things that only you can do for our church? What are 2 things that only you can do for our church? Why do we ask this question? Here's why. Because every single leader that God sends to our church, we understand this. They are all gifted differently. Some are incredibly gifted in their personality when it comes to relating to people. Others are incredibly gifted when it comes to technology and their ability to get the message out via the internet. Others are incredibly gifted with their business mind. And so the question that we ask is, not only are you spiritually mentoring others, the question is this: what are you adding that nobody else can add? We want to know what your skill set is, how God has shaped you for ministry, and we want to give you entrance into our church to do that. I often tell so many of those deacons that work in our church and have been here longest, I often say, look, Southern Hills is your ministry sandbox. You've earned our trust. We love you. Where would you like God to move you and have you serve? In the women's ministry, in the men's ministry, in the family ministry, in the seniors ministry. What is God doing in your heart? We want to find out. Last question in our annual review process is, what counseling and training could we provide you? A lot of times there are deacons, elders, ministry leaders who are thinking to themselves, man, I really need to be trained more. I haven't been trained, or I really need counseling in this particular area. So we want to make sure annually we look at them and say, what is it that we can do to help you become a better minister here? See, this is what I believe. I believe that a thriving church is one that has diverse and unified plethora of leaders. I believe a dying church is one that only relies upon the skill set of one spiritual leader in the church. Look. God's given you an incredible group of people, whether that be a group of 100 or a group of 10,000. And with every single one of these people that are coming in, God is sending leaders among them, men and women called of God and anointed to do the work alongside of you. So what can you do? Well, you can recruit constantly, you can mentor intentionally, and you can review annually. I hope that helps. Now, I'm going to throw it over to the host pastor at your local idea night, and you're going to be discussing the questions that we've submitted related to this topic. Take some time to think through those questions, answer those questions for yourself, and then discuss it broadly there. I'm looking forward to hearing about the results.